I want to introduce Dr. Ellison, and I'm really happy that he joined us today because he's the executive director of the West Virginia Autism Training Center at Marshall University. And so, you know, we've worked very closely with him and Marshall University, the Autism Training Center, and the university. And so it's really nice to see this collaboration today and hear about the work that's being done down there. I'm also a little biased because it's one of my alma maters, so I think it's a great place. So just a little bit more about Dr. Ellison. He's a licensed professional counselor who's worked nearly 35 years to provide person-centered support, services, and advocacy to individuals who live with autism spectrum disorder, their families, and those who support them. He's a member of the Autism Society of America's Panel of Professional Advisors and a board member of the Autism Society of West Virginia. He was the lead author of the Benchmarks of Effective Supports for College Students with Autism Spectrum Disorder and has authored or co-authored several publications specific to the support of those diagnosed with ASD. So we're lucky. We're lucky to have him presenting his work and telling us a little bit about the center and then his research. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Ellison, and let me know if you need anything.
Thank you, Dr. Marc. I want to make sure first everyone can hear me okay? I presume, Leslie, you'll tell me if they can't. Okay.
Yes.
I want to turn my volume down just a little bit. I'm getting some feedback. I appreciate we only have an hour and that we want to save the last 15 minutes for questions. So I'm going to probably end up rushing through some things. I carved out information for today's presentation from a 3-hour presentation that I do. I'm really interested right now in sex-based presentation differences, in large part because I think that women with autism are often misdiagnosed, and those women who are pretty highly independent, who have autism, diagnosed or not, are often go to talk therapists for support as opposed to Title 19 waiver providers or things like that. And I think that talk therapists, counselors, or psychologists really sometimes may miss some of the more subtle aspects of autism as they experience it. So this is in part from a training I did for licensed professional counselors a few months ago. Very quickly, I want to make sure that we talk just a little bit about what to expect. Because we have folks from all over the state, I want to make sure that we talk a little bit about the Autism Training Center and our scope of service and process for referral. We've changed a lot in the last 2 or 3 years, and I'm going to highlight some of those. We want to talk about the DSM-5 diagnostic criteria to really look at, I think, how women may be experiencing that or presenting that differently means that we have to understand some of the basic aspects of that diagnostic criteria. So we'll touch on that before we get into the women-specific information. I also want to talk a little bit about some emerging theories that might explain the differences, and I'm partial to one in particular. I'm going to have some videos that will hopefully highlight or illustrate some of the points I'm trying to make. And you should know that in each of these the videos, the individual that is talking is diagnosed with autism. And to note, as you can see on the screen there, I cobbled this presentation together with some help from other licensed professional counselors or provisionally licensed counselors who I work with at the Autism Training Center. The Autism Training Center is a statewide technical assistance and direct services center. And I'm going to highlight a few things that you may not be aware of. The first is that we're, in the technical assistance aspect of our work, we maintain and house the Autism Spectrum Disorders Registry. You may not know that autism is a mandatory reportable condition in the state. So any clinical psychologist or medical doctor that makes a diagnosis is obligated by law to report that to the registry. If you didn't know that, the form for how to do that is on the Training Center for the West Virginia Autism Training Center website, and you can simply go there, download the one-page form, and the instructions are there on how to do that. It's a very simple process, but we do house that. Another thing I want to mention is that on the technical assistance piece, we do a significant amount these days of school consultations, and we started this past year with our first of what will be an annual Autism Across the Lifespan conference. I've had a dream for years of having a lifespan conference that's patterned in large part after the Teach conference in North Carolina, which I participated in several times. And we did that this past year, and I think it was really successful. We do a significant amount of work in collaboration with the Department of Education. We do teacher academies across the state, multi-day intense trainings on evidence-based teaching strategies for kids with autism. And we carry out school-wide and early childhood positive behavior intervention and supports programs across the state. We're really proud of that. That just started being built about 4 years ago, and we've worked pretty intensely with about 185 schools through the school-wide PBIS, and we've done training for over 400 early childhood professionals in a couple of years. So we're very proud of that program. The direct services is probably the portion of our agency that's changed quite a bit. In the last year, we've developed a multidisciplinary diagnostic and assessment clinic on campus, and we can only do that part-time. It's a very insignificant amount of time that we can devote to that, because we've pulled in OTs and PTs and speech folks and psychology people from across different aspects of the university, and everybody's time is limited. In the first year, we simply could only do that one day a month. I'm hoping that in 2018 we can increase that somewhat. We have the college program for students with autism spectrum disorder. That is, we were the first university in the country to develop a program specifically on campus for students with autism, and we've since 2002 when we started, we've since helped about 20-25 universities across the country develop similar programs, and we support on campus anywhere between 50 and 60 students each semester who are diagnosed with autism and getting traditional, typical degrees. They're just getting tremendous supports from us, a lot of mentoring. We're really proud of that program. Since 2002, between 93 and 94% of all the students who've been enrolled in our program have graduated. And some of you who are familiar with us may know a program that we used to do called Family-Focused Positive Behavior Support, and that doesn't exist as a program any longer. We spent the last year and a half or 2 years trying to figure out how to get rid of a wait list, frankly. What the FFPBS program did, and did very well, was take about 100 families a year through a 10-month process. So if you were the 101st family, you immediately had a 10-month wait to get services. And over 25 years, that wait grew and grew, and we had quite a long wait list. So what we've done now over the last year and a half is developed services in tier-based services. So level 1 services would involve a lot of educational things, identification cards, access to our lending library and training videos. Level 2, regional coaching sessions, which were really, we reached about 1,500 people in 2017 in 25 counties doing different coaching sessions and skills groups. And parent cohorts. One of the things we started was a cohort in different regions for parents of newly diagnosed children. And then level 3, is really what people may know as our family-focused positive behavior support. That would be a level where folks would based on assessments, need behavior support plans and more intensive services. The referral process for us can be fairly simple now. You must be a West Virginia resident. One of the misconceptions about us is that you have to be a child, but we serve any age. We had someone just in his 60s who was recently diagnosed who signed up for some supports from us. You must have a clinical diagnosis, and that's one area where a lot of folks misunderstand what we need. We get a lot of evaluations from different people besides a clinical psychologist or a medical doctor, and our state mandate requires it be a clinical evaluation. Services are free except for the college program, which is a fee-based program, and some specific school-based consultations. And hope you can write down the contact information for Kelly Preston, who's our intake coordinator. Email or telephone there would start the referral process. And when we're talking about individuals with autism, I want to make sure that I say that although there are diagnostic aspects and characteristics that everyone with autism must share as part of the diagnosis, how they share it may be different. And there's an adage in the autism community that gets spoken quite a bit that if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. And I need you to be thoughtful of that as we discuss things. I want to make sure that I don't make sweeping generalizations. And I want to make sure that I highlight several times here that individuals experience characteristics and symptoms sometimes in different ways, in varying ways. So I think that in terms of talking about autism, one of the things I like to talk to teachers about, and I'm often surprised that it's an issue that we talk about, is that autism spectrum disorder is a neurodevelopmental disorder. It's not a disruptive behavior disorder, for instance, like oppositional defiant behavior or things that are willful kinds of disruptive behavior. And neurodevelopmental, of course, is associated with the brain and the neurological system, and those disorders, and autism, of course, is one, affects a person's emotions, memory, ability to learn, socialize, and maintain some self-control. If we go through the diagnostic criteria from the DSM-5, it's pretty controversial for the last few years about whether DSM made things better or made things worse. And I'll leave that up to individual diagnosticians. I tend to like it better, but that may just be me. But it requires a persistent deficit in social communication and social interaction across multiple contexts. And that can be manifested in a variety of ways, and the DSM gives lots of examples about that. But those are consistent deficits that must be there. And restricted repetitive patterns of behavior, interest, or activities. And again, that can be manifested in lots of different ways. One of the best examples that audiences always get is that if I give a person with what used to be described as PDD-NOS or autistic disorder 10 Matchbox cars and tell them to go play, very often that person's going to go to some place on the periphery and line up the cars and just keep lining them up, making sure they're symmetrical. If you give the kid with what used to be called Asperger's disorder the same 10 Matchbox cars, what you might end up with is a 30-minute monologue about Matchbox cars, or an essay about Matchbox cars, or they may get online and read about Matchbox cars. Those are the same kind of things, just expressed differently in different people. Symptoms have to be present in the early developmental period. You don't wake up on a Tuesday when you're 8 and suddenly have the diagnostic symptoms of autism. and they have to cause clinically significant impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning. And I may say this a couple of times, but I'm going to say it here. There is no such thing as a mild form of autism. I hear that phrase a lot, and I think it does a real disservice to people with autism, because what it then becomes is, well, he's got a mild form of autism. But to have a diagnosis of autism, you must have clinically significant impairment in those areas. So there's a minimum threshold that someone must meet in order to do it. And the most independent person with autism that I know has significant impairment in those areas. And I recognize that people use those terms to try to draw a distinction between individuals that are more challenged or more independent. I get that. But I think the use of the word mild form of sometimes lends itself to folks who are more independent being ridiculed, or they believe that they could do better if they tried harder. And this is the slide I often use to make the point that I just made, which is that the concept of a spectrum in the autism spectrum disorder isn't a left to right linear kind of spectrum. It is that the concept is individual, that folks who have a diagnosis of autism have persistent significant deficits in all the same areas, but how those characteristics or symptoms are expressed or lived with are different for each people, and sometimes different on different days, perhaps. But they all must meet a minimum threshold, and then individually they may be experienced in different ways over time. And as you probably know now, severity levels for autism have been developed. Level 3 it requires the most substantial report. There's a really severe deficits in social communication and very inflexible kind of interest in repetitive behavior. The most substantial report is level 3. And then level 2 is marked deficits, inflexibility mostly. Frequently enough that it's of concern, but to a lesser degree than 3. And then level 1 is requiring support in those areas, and I think level 1 would be more along the lines of what used to be called Asperger's disorder. I pulled some red flags off a circular that's often sent to pediatricians, and threw this up here because these are the common published red flags that are often considered by diagnosticians. You'll see things like reduced interest in social interaction, a lack of eye contact, unusual prosody there near the bottom. But I have some real differences of opinion about some of those. I've put those in bold italics there to the right. For instance, I think that instead of reduced interest in social interaction, what might be more appropriate is that there's an impairment in social interaction. Many people with autism I know have an interest in social interaction, and sometimes they have a heightened interest in social interaction. But there's always an impairment, whether that is somebody being incredibly isolated or spending too much time with someone. I used to work with, early in our college days program, we had a young man from Alabama who came to a summer class in his first year. And back in those days, it was almost barbaric. We had summer school was 4 days long, and I think there were 4 or 5 hour classes at a time. They were awful. And he met a woman, and they struck up a friendship that morning, and he spent literally the next 3 days with her in a platonic way. But he ate every meal with her. He slept on the floor of her dorm room. He went to every class with her. Every single aspect of this was social interaction was with her. until she couldn't take it anymore and called her boyfriend and had him come and tell the guy to leave him alone. But the point I'm making is that he didn't have a reduced interest, but he certainly did have an impaired interest, impairment in social interaction. And the same goes for lack of eye contact. I see that lots of folks actually have eye contact even that is too much. And especially I think kids who are going through skill building programs who learn eye contact still often have socially inappropriate eye gaze. And to me, that's much more along the lines of whether it's not a lack of eye contact, but socially appropriate eye gaze is, I think more accurate. The use of communication, and rather than the development of, is probably something that instead of an impairment in communication, I think there often ought to be a distinction to make sure that people understand that sometimes incredibly articulate people are often using scripts that they've filed away somewhere to pull out into certain times. Even though they sound very, very articulate and even impromptu, they're often scripts that have been pulled out for use in that moment. And to further dissect some of those red flags, I think that that some of those are not necessarily accurate for females, especially. And we'll talk a lot about those as we move forward, especially the reduced interest in social interaction, the eye contact, the lack of showing gestures, repetitive behavior, and restricted interest. We're going to talk about all of those as we go forward. But those I think are becoming much more recognized as not always being accurate with women. And this is the next couple of pictures are pictures that I chose that I often use just to very quickly kind of illustrate kind of what I'm talking about. I say that with full knowledge that these are snapshots of a second in the lives of these folks, but I think they make the point, at least for me. These are three young boys who are diagnosed with autism, and if you look very closely at that picture, you see that each child is kind of focused in on his own thing. There's not a lot of social interaction. There's almost, at least in that picture, just a complete absence of thought of the next person. Even the body postures are kind of odd. You see the kid on the far left in the blue shirt has his arm kind of torqued up odd, which often is something you don't normally set that way. It usually suggests some kind of sensory issue. And the child in the middle, always reminds me of the concept of theory of mind, which we'll talk about in a second, where he's really just focused on his own comfort. That's not the typical posture of a 10-year-old kid who's fully aware that other people are making judgments about them. And the other aspect is they're all sitting on the left side of the bench. There's an entire half of a bench to the right side that nobody's focused on. And in our world, in our culture, the hidden curriculum is that you don't sit close to people on a bench. It's just there's about 9 out of every 10 people find that to be really taboo. And there's a striking difference, I think, in affect between those boys and these girls, all of whom, again, are diagnosed with autism. You see much more of difference in affect. You see a significant difference in social connection. I get a sense that some of these girls are trying really hard to demonstrate something that may not be intuitive or may not feel very natural to them, but they recognize the need to do that, and they've seen how selfies are perhaps done, and they're doing those things. So, real difference I think, in that presentation. We'll talk for a few minutes about some of the characteristics I think that boys and girls kind of share challenges with. And these are the things that I think are a significant issue for people to understand about autism. Significant problems with executive functions, with challenges of social communication, social skill deficits, communication itself, and challenges related to theory of mind. And I think those things, individually and combined, create lots of issues day-to-day life. They alienate people sometimes who might otherwise be part of a social network. They lead to significant day-to-day anxiety and stress and behavior challenges, regardless of what your abilities are. They often lead to behavior difficulties, and they cause a lot of misunderstandings and even legal issues for some people. And the first thing I want to talk about a little bit is executive functions. And of course, if you know executive functions, you know those are cognitions that help us do these things. They help us organize our time and manage it. They help us with reflection and metacognition. These are the things that help us self-regulate and be flexible and have some type of self-monitoring aspect of our lives. And folks with attention deficit disorder, for example, and individuals with autism are often very challenged in executive functions. I think lots of times this is one of the reasons that you see kids with autism in school who are level 1 or Asperger's disorder. Maybe they're in middle school and they go to school with their homework in their bag, and the teacher calls up for homework to be turned in, and the student just kind of freezes and doesn't turn in the homework. Perhaps it's the transition of doing something and then doing something else, or perhaps it's the anxiety that comes with oh my gosh, they're going to review my homework. But often they just kind of become frozen and don't turn it in. I know lots of people who experience that. Those issues to me are really about get down to executive functions. And I have a couple of videos that I want to suggest are really about executive function. This is a young boy who, for years, in the 30-plus years I've spent working with folks with autism, I've often asked people, tell me what it's like to live with autism. And through the 80s, 90s, and in the 2000s, it was hard to hear from people what that was like. This young man at the age of 5 or 6 is describing how he experiences living with autism in ways that are just magical. He has a speech impediment, so he's talking about his brain when he says brain. You'll hear him in just a second. But this is a young man who's been at a birthday party. You can hear the birthday party noises in the background. He's become really overwhelmed, and he's trying very hard to stay in control.
A plane always started. Like my plane always started all the time. So that's why me and my brain don't get along together. Well, what's your brain do? My brain does not let me say the word things. Always need to tell you and Daddy. That's why me and my brain that's why I have a bad day with my brain. You do? Yes. And if this happens at 40, whenever we leave 40, then it is going to be bad. I'm going to punch him, like 100 times, and kick him 100 times. Keep on going about 1 and about 2 and about 3. Yeah, I'm going to go do those on my brain.
Now, just for because we don't have a lot of time, I'm going to cut that short. But he goes on to describe it, and it's just remarkable how he's able to describe what he feels like doing, or where his brain is telling him to do, and that he's struggling to not do those things. Also, I think that this self-regulation issue is really affected by executive functions. I think lots of people recognize this experience, and I'm going to cut it short too, but it'll go for a few seconds. Now, that's not a young girl who's angry or didn't get what she wanted or is having a meltdown because she's spoiled. That's a young girl who can't regulate the stress or the sensory problems or whatever it is that she's feeling internally. And as the video goes further, she ends up pulling her mother into her tighter because that compression, it helps her recover and helps her calm down. Another really important thing, I think, especially with women, is understanding what theory of mind is. And theory of mind is essentially the recognition and understanding that people have beliefs and intentions and knowledge that I don't have, and to understand that people are making judgments about us. They're constantly assessing us, making judgments about us. Being able to project into the mind of other people, understanding that other people have different intentions. And in typical theory of mind development, young children, I think people tend to go through theory of mind milestones or development around the age of 3 or so. But here's a typical neurotypical young man who still has not yet gone through theory of mind, and you can see how that plays out with the researcher.
So here is our idea. Suppose you take something very basic about what I like and what you like, which is the kind of food that we like. That's something that even very little babies know about. So we set up this situation in which the other person is expressing, telling the child that their desires, their likes, their wants are different from those of the child. And the question is, can the child use that information to make an inference about what my mental state is, even when that mental state is different from their own? Watch. Look. Ooh, yuck! Ew! I tasted the crackers. Ew, yuck! Ooh, I tasted the crackers. Now look, son, look. Mmm. Broccoli. Mmm. Look, Sonny. Mmm. I taste broccoli. Now, Sonny, could you give me some? Could you give me some? Can I have some? Very good, thank you.
Yeah, every time he's going to give her the goldfish because he likes the goldfish. And if he likes the goldfish, everyone must like the goldfish. And I think individuals with autism who struggle with theory of mind experience the world sometimes very, very similar ways. If I have information that I know, and you must know it too, and therefore I don't have to share that with you. And I think it plays out in lots of different ways. It helps us predict and assess the intentions of other people. It helps us connect socially. It helps with the demonstration of empathy. And again, understanding that we're being judged by others. I always put the Rain Man poster in there because that poster to me is a perfect example of theory of mind. The Tom Cruise character is very much aware that other people are watching him. His posture, his clothing, how he looks, the sunglasses, the haircut, everything is saying, I'm the man. Because he knows you're watching. He's sending that message to you. And Raymond, on the other hand, is dressed for Raymond. He's simply taking care of his own needs. He seems unaware that other people are making judgments of him. And I think one of the issues that affect people with autism, both sexes, is the hidden curriculum. Understanding those hidden rules that we learn in our daily lives. The cartoon there sums it up pretty well for me. I assumed he'd know to eat the cone last because he's holding a dollop of ice cream in his hand. Nobody teaches you to eat the cone last. You just watch other people and you figure out from what they're doing how to eat ice cream. And individuals with autism are not absorbing the hidden curriculums in our day-to-day world. Things like classroom etiquette. Most folks who go into a new classroom or a new setting of some kind, if you're uncertain of what to do, you watch other people. And most people with autism, including especially boys with autism, are really challenged in that aspect. For purposes of time, I won't show you that video. So in getting specifically to the sex differences, although prevalence right now is being studied in multi-states among 8-year-old children. Of course, autism is diagnosed about 4.5 times more in boys than it is in girls. And the diagnostic criteria is met in boys in about 1 in 42, and in girls in 1 in 189. That's a significant difference, of course. There are neuroimaging is being done these days to try to look at differences in the brain. One of the things that is being at least talked about more openly these days is that perhaps the female brain is designed more along the lines of typically developing males in their social abilities than they are with typical girls. In other words, girls with autism may be more in line, or brains are maybe more in line socially with neurotypical males than they are with typical girls. But regardless, girls with autism may be harder to diagnose for lots of reasons, including historically, the criteria has been developed around boys, and they may not fit perfectly into that diagnostic criteria. There's some real overlapping symptoms and aspects of the diagnosis with things like OCD and anorexia and certainly social anxiety disorder. And I think how internalized symptoms are experienced is a significant reason for fewer diagnoses. In the historical perspective has been that up to the 80s and the early 90s, it was thought that females that were diagnosed with autism had more significant symptoms. They were typically more challenged. If you read a lot of the literature in the 80s and 90s about women with autism, girls with autism, they would talk about almost exclusively nonverbal, much more self-injurious behavior, perhaps more aggressive kind of behavior. And then in '94, when the Asperger's disorder was added to the diagnostic manual, I think there was, of course, there was that explosion of children diagnosed with autism around that time. And I think that sex differences started looking different, especially in terms of what I have highlighted in green there: fewer restricted and repetitive patterns and externalizing behavior problems may occur in females. There's a woman with autism talking about how she can spot women with autism very quickly.
Autism looks different in girls because we internalize. The untrained eye can see a girl with autism and think that she blends in fine, but I can pick it straight away. Usually it's subtle movements in the body. It's intense eye contact rather than no or lack of eye contact. It's the way we articulate, we speak very well.
Now, research on the topic of sex differences, and especially in communication and social skills, are really all over the place, frankly. If you look at a lot of the research from 2007 to 2013, lots of studies showed that there are no significant differences in communication and conversation and language levels between the sexes. But other studies found that males with autism had greater expressive and receptive language than females, and that females had more impaired social communication. And then in 2012, Parker found that females had stronger nonverbal communication abilities than males. So there's a significant amount of differences sometimes of opinion and research, but I think most of the research is coming to the conclusion that that more women diagnosed with autism have fewer social communication challenges than do boys with autism. Research is much more consistent in terms of how women and men are different in restricted, repetitive patterns of behavior, interests, or activities. The studies from 2007 to 2011 or 12 show that males with autism have many more restricted, repetitive patterns of behavior than females, and that males have more repetitive motor movements compared to females. There were no differences in self-injury sections. Simone, in 2009, because I'm going to mention this again later, found that women will have obsessive interests, but those interests are not as obscure or unusual as the interest of males. They tend to be perhaps more in line with what a stereotypical young girl will play with, dolls and those kinds of things, jewelry. We'll see a video here in a minute of a woman talking about jewelry. In fact, this is it. This is Dave and Lindsay. Dave is a meteorologist. By the way, if you've not seen the movie Autism in Love, please go home today and watch it. It's a brilliant movie that talks about different people, each with different abilities and levels of independence, talking about and showing how they experience intimacy and love and affection. This is Dave and Lindsay, and they both are diagnosed with autism. Dave's a meteorologist. He lives in Tennessee and crunches all the data for information that goes out about the weather to TV and radio weather stations. And Lindsay is at his time there as his girlfriend, live-in girlfriend, and is now they're married. Lindsay is diagnosed with autism. Lindsay didn't speak until she was 4 or 5. She went through a lot of ABA discrete trial programs. But this is a really good presentation, I think, of how people are experiencing their fixed interests in different ways. Dave is watching TV. Lindsay wants to talk to him about jewelry. Dave suddenly hears the weather being mentioned on TV near the end, and watch how he behaves.
Do you know, did I ever tell you one reason I love jewelry so much is because it gives me a sort of a shield to sort of protect myself from sort of vulnerable elements.
That's news to me, actually. I didn't know.
Oh, really?
Vulnerable elements.
Yeah, I kind of discovered that after wearing necklaces for the past several, especially the last 10 years, I've really been into wearing heavy jewelry, and I discovered a reason why that it kind of makes me, because I feel so vulnerable and feel so shy and, introverted, that wearing the jewelry kind of makes me feel that sort of false sense of confidence, and it kind of makes me feel less vulnerable. It makes me feel like it's sort of a shield, so to protect myself from feeling more vulnerable.
Well, it looks like the weather just came on. I was going to catch a glimpse here and see what he says about me.
I can't ever interrupt you with the weather.
Well, you can always be near me and maybe not talk to you as much.
Yeah, it makes me smile every time I see it. I'm really trying to be thoughtful of time, so I'm going to breeze through these, and we'll still have time for questions here in a moment. But in terms of a hypothesis as to why fewer girls are diagnosed, there has been a real historical bias in the conventional male presentation of autism. And there have been a couple of theories that are sometimes genetic-based or other kinds of reasons that people believe that women are not diagnosed as much. One is that an early theory was that women are just as apt as prevalent with autism as men, but the genetic threshold for impairment is higher for females than males. This hypothesis hasn't been supported by studies. Greater variability model talks about how men with autism display more variation and women less variation of symptoms, so greater impairments are required to produce the symptoms that meet the criteria. There's a brain difference model, which talks about I put in parentheses, some argue that male brains are designed for understanding and building systems, while women's brains are designed for empathy and compassion. And the theory really is that females are less susceptible to autism because they're more sophisticated social competencies. But the theory I think that's gaining more traction, and the one that I subscribe to, is the camouflage hypothesis, which has been talked about from Gould and Smith and several other researchers. And that really is simply about women are able to mask, whether it's intentionally or unconsciously, mask their social communication limitations and avoid autism diagnosis that way. For instance, it's believed through this theory that girls are more able to follow social actions through observation. Like I said earlier, young children in a classroom, boys with autism are often not going to watch classmates to see how to behave. But this theory says, and I certainly would agree with it, that many girls will follow social actions through observation. Perhaps it's because of how women are socialized, but they tend to be quicker to apologize and make appeasement when they make an error. They're more socially aware and socially driven, so they're going to seek out opportunities. And they might fixate on one special friend with whom they want to share things with, and sometimes become in a very dependent relationship, but they will seek out that person. And as they grow in self-awareness and insight, girls may take greater pains to avoid drawing attention to themselves. And we all know that if in our society, that if a boy is if an 8-year-old boy is very quiet and withdrawn, we tend to think something may be up. But if a girl is kind of quiet and withdrawn, then she's probably just well behaved and perhaps shy, it's thought, when really it could be autism. And when we're talking about that, she has a, so let me take a second.
I was watching Connie do girl play. She had the Barbies and she was making a story with them, and she set up a pool, and then she put them all in the pool around it in a position so they were ready to talk. And then she went and left the game. And I came up to her and I said, "Oh, what are they doing? Are they talking to each other?" And she said, "No, they're in the pool." And it suddenly struck me that although she looked like she was doing imaginative play, that it stopped at the very surface of it. It was a veneer.
Some of the coping mechanisms for me to fit in is quite often this masking thing and pretending to be somebody else, this chameleon factor. Because we want to try and fit in with the group and society in general, so often with a bright and bubbly person, I will try to be funny. We have the more we can change with someone else, the more we tend to get accepted because we know something to communicate with someone else.
She looks like she's managing and she looks happy and social. It's all on the surface. You scratch it, the veneer, it's based on mimicry, and that's the thing that distinguishes the girls from the boys.
Yeah, and I think the woman who spoke, the blonde lady who spoke right before that, really describes how she experiences it, and it's what I'm trying to suggest here, is that she may not understand going into a situation what the rules, the social rules are in that environment, but she knows to watch other people and to kind of conform to what's going on. I'm not going to show this video for time, but masking often results in improper diagnosis and treatment. I know a significant amount of people, I believe, are women with autism who are diagnosed with borderline personality or other kinds of personality or mental health disorders, sometimes labeled overly dramatic, those kinds of things, when really it's perhaps autism. And I let this slide in, even though it's about talk therapy clients for autism. This is what I think the profile of a typical female talk therapy client is, and for this group, I would say this is probably a highly independent profile of a highly independent woman with autism that you may see. Desires friendships and enjoys social environments, but is hyper or hyposocial. Quality friendships are not fully understood. Typically, she believes that relationships are deeper than they are really in reality. Experiences frequent conflict due to misunderstandings and relationships on the jobs, shuts down, becomes kind of emotionally paralyzed when conflict occurs. Uses other women as role models to learn interpersonal protocols, can be highly vulnerable in social situations, has significantly impaired executive functions, and particularly with areas of self-regulation and cognitive organization. Struggles to fit in, has a strong desire to do so, but has extreme problems in terms of relationship building. Has an impaired theory of mind, and especially in interpreting the intentions of others. You know, lots of people with autism, for instance, that can't tell if you are smiling at them, whether you're actually angry at them, or whether you're happy with them. And they have fixed obsessive interests that may look typical on the surface, but which take up an extreme amount of time. Finally, I'll mention that there are lots of resources if you're interested in looking more at this topic. Some media and books, and our Sisterhood on the Spectrum. It's a really good book by Jennifer O'Toole. Please watch Autism in Love if you've not seen it. It's really wonderful. The Chameleons, Women with Autism, and The Changing the Face of Autism are both on YouTube and can be accessed easily. They're both wonderful videos. And then there are some TED Talks and things that how I learned to communicate my inner life with Asperger's. Rosie King's How Autism Freed Me to Be Myself. All of these things, What It Feels Like to Be Autistic by Temple, and Everybody, Glamour, Dateability, Sexuality, and Disability, all of those have something to do with women who are experiencing autism. You've been very kind and patient, and I appreciate that. If anybody has questions, I'll try my best to answer them. Okay. Dr. Cottrell, I guess there are no questions?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? I was just rambling, and no one could hear me.
I can hear you now, yes.
Okay, I'm sorry. So we do have some questions via the chat that I'll ask that are coming in, but before I do that, does anyone else have any questions? All lines are unmuted at this time.
Oh.
Hey, Jack, mute your phone. Okay, that's okay. The one question that came in through the chat is this: is it common in teenage males with autism to have sexual obsessions with females? The reader says, I know they have obsessions, but are they more times than not harmless, or do sexual obsessions occur? And then if so, what would be a pathway to help treat these behaviors?
Well, that's a loaded question, because the first thing I thought of was it's common for every teenage boy to have sexual obsessions with women. But I'm trying to figure out from the question what I presume that the person means that it is. I'm going to presume by the question that it's the amount of time and the amount of effort and thought that's put into the thought. And I don't know the answer to how common it is, other than it's biology and it does happen. But my suggestion would be that, again, forgive me, I don't know the person, obviously, but perhaps it's not the sexual aspect that the person is obsessed with, but the social misunderstandings about what, and the inability to kind of organize things. You know, lots of times young boys are obsessed with sexual kinds of things, but they know when to pay attention to that and when to hide that and when to not talk about it, or they do it in some kind of moderation because they can predict when they can pay more attention to it. And I tend to think that if somebody tells me that somebody's obsessed with relationships or obsessed with stalking or obsessed with sexuality, to me that's more of an issue about learning how to self-regulate and learning how to predict and learning how to plan. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. Okay, another question is, and anyone can ask other questions, but one that came through the chat, is there any recent data on the number of West Virginia persons diagnosed with autism? Has there been an increase?
I want to make sure I heard you correctly. In West Virginia, has there been an increase?
Yes.
No, West Virginia has stayed pretty much at the 1 in 68. It's stayed right along the lines of the prevalence. The reason we pay attention to that is that West Virginia was one of the first 9 states that was involved in that first original prevalence study. And then after the first round of 2 years, West Virginia dropped out. But we paid really close attention to it, and we're right at 1 in 68 as well.
Okay. Any other questions people might have? Oh. So another question is there a way to access the data that is on your IASD registry?
No, there is not.
Okay.
It's a very confidential bit of information, and we don't use it for anything other than the registration.
Okay. Is autism often misdiagnosed as ADD or ADHD? Is another question.
I think so. In terms of folks who are at that level 1 or more independent phase, I think in my experience, kind of a typical diagnostic history is ADHD early, and sometimes oppositional defiant disorder early. Through the teen years, kind of becomes depression of some sort, and then usually as they're older and things don't change, becomes more autism. And I think if you think about kids who are that more independent kid with autism in those stages of his life, that makes a lot of sense. You know, you're struggling with self-regulation and all those things, and you seem kind of hyperactive and inattentive. And then in your teen years, you may not be as, you know, making friends as much as everybody else, or at all, perhaps. So it feels like you're perhaps more isolated and depressed. In my experience, looking through thousands of evaluations over 30 years, that's a really common diagnostic history, yes.
Okay. All right. Well, with that, I will close this out. We're right at 3, and so Dr. Ellison, I appreciate your time and expertise. It was really interesting to see, and the videos just make it, I think. There are comments. I don't know if you've had a chance, because you're speaking, to see the chats, but people are generally commenting that they like it. They've enjoyed your presentation as well. So
no, I appreciate it. I can only see the slides. I don't see anything else. I'm sorry.
Okay. Well, I can send some of those to you.
All right. Thanks a bunch. Take care, folks.
All right. Thank you, and thanks everyone. Happy holidays.